The news broke like a thunderclap, reverberating across the country in an instant. Television screens flickered with urgent banners, radios crackled with updates, and social media feeds exploded with speculation and disbelief. It was the kind of announcement that stopped people in their tracks, making them pause mid-sentence, mid-step, as the gravity of the situation began to sink in. Supreme Court halts billions in humanitarian aid. The words scrolled across every major network, their impact immediate and profound. In Washington, D.C., alerts pinged and the corridors of power buzzed with urgent whispers. Lawmakers, aides, and journalists scrambled for information, their faces etched with concern and confusion. The Supreme Court, meant to be above politics, had stepped into the center of a national firestorm. Its marble steps, usually symbols of stability, now became the stage for a high-stakes drama. The decision, delivered through a brief unsigned order, sent shockwaves from the Capitol to refugee camps abroad. International leaders watched closely, and humanitarian organizations braced for the fallout. For millions, the stakes were immediate. Food, medicine, shelter, all suddenly in limbo. Families who had relied on aid now faced an uncertain future, their hopes dashed in a single moment. Aid workers faced a desperate waiting game, unsure how to help those in need. Their hands were tied, their resources frozen, as they fielded desperate questions from those they served. Across the globe, the ripple effects grew. Volunteers packed up supplies they could no longer distribute, and children watched as aid trucks drove away, leaving behind only uncertainty. Political fallout was swift. Democrats called it judicial overreach. Republicans hailed it as a check on lower courts. The airwaves filled with heated debate, each side framing the decision as a turning point for the nation. The battle lines were drawn, and the Supreme Court was now at the epicenter. Protesters gathered outside, their voices rising in anger and fear, while supporters cheered what they saw as a victory for the rule of law. This story begins not with a gavel, but with a signature, a president's controversial move, a legal challenge, and a constitutional crisis. The chain of events set in motion would test the very foundations of American democracy. As the nation holds its breath, the Supreme Court's intervention raises profound questions about power, democracy, and America's role in the world. Citizens everywhere debated what this meant for the country's future, and experts warned of lasting consequences. The chaos is just beginning. In the days ahead, the nation would grapple with uncertainty, division, and the search for answers in a time of unprecedented crisis. The Supreme Court's emergency order came with remarkable speed. Within hours, the justices had stepped in, pausing a lower court's ruling that had sent shockwaves through the legal and humanitarian communities. With a single unsigned order, the court froze billions of dollars in humanitarian aid, leaving critical resources locked away and out of reach for those who needed them most. The justices offered no detailed explanation for their decision, only a terse statement that the freeze would remain in place, while they considered the complex legal questions at hand. For many, this silence only deepened the sense of uncertainty. This abrupt intervention thrust the Supreme Court into the center of a high-stakes constitutional clash, pitting Congress's power of the purse against the executive branch's claims of national security authority. Congress had already debated and allocated the funds, aiming to address urgent humanitarian needs. Yet the administration blocked their release, arguing that national security concerns outweighed the immediate crisis. A federal appeals court had sided with Congress, insisting that the legislative branch's intent should prevail. But the Supreme Court's sudden intervention signaled that the legal battle was far from over, and that deeper constitutional questions loomed. The administrative stay, while technically temporary, effectively preserved the status quo, halting the flow of funds and suspending government transactions until the justices could fully review the case. For aid organizations on the ground, every day of delay meant more than just paperwork. It meant real people going without food, medicine, and shelter. The uncertainty was agonizing. The court's order, though labeled as temporary, felt like a devastating blow to those working in crisis zones. It seemed to validate the administration's defiance of Congress and plunged humanitarian programs into a state of chaos and confusion. In their brief order, the justices appeared to prioritize the government's warnings about the dangers of irreversible spending over the plaintiffs' urgent pleas about irreversible human suffering. The balance between law and compassion hung in the air. The decision ignited a fierce and immediate debate across the country. Legal scholars, politicians, and ordinary citizens all weighed in, questioning the court's motives and the broader implications for the separation of powers. For those waiting in line for aid or watching supplies dwindle in crisis zones, the distinction between a temporary pause and a permanent loss was meaningless. Each passing day without relief deepened the crisis, leaving families and communities in ever greater distress. The crisis began with a Trump administration order freezing billions in humanitarian aid, citing executive authority over foreign policy. Officials claimed the freeze was necessary to prevent aid from reaching adversaries and to reassess program effectiveness. Critics saw it as a political move, challenging Congress's power to control spending. Humanitarian groups sued, arguing the president cannot unilaterally block funds Congress has appropriated, a principle enshrined in the Constitution and the Impoundment Control Act. The fight was about more than money. It was about the very foundation of American democracy. The legal battle began in district court, where aid groups sought an injunction to release the frozen funds. The judge sided with them, ruling the administration's actions violated the Impoundment Control Act and the Constitution. The administration appealed, but the D.C. Circuit Court upheld the injunction, emphasizing the humanitarian stakes and Congress's authority. Judge Ali's opinion was a forceful defense of the legislative branch's power of the purse. With options dwindling, the administration turned to the Supreme Court for an emergency stay. The path was set for a showdown at the nation's highest court. The stakes, not just billions in aid, but the balance of power itself. The nation watched as the case escalated to the Supreme Court. Chief Justice John Roberts found himself at the center of a judicial storm, balancing the court's legitimacy against deep ideological divides. His vote for the administrative stay was seen as both procedural and potentially revealing. Judge Tariq Ali's lower court ruling had become a rallying cry for congressional authority. On one side, humanitarian groups arguing for lives at stake and the clear intent of Congress. On the other, government lawyers defending broad executive power in foreign affairs. The case pitted immediate human need against the argument for a strong, flexible presidency. The Supreme Court was now the final battleground. The outcome would shape the limits of power for years to come. The Supreme Court's order came via the shadow docket, an emergency process marked by speed, secrecy, and little explanation. No public arguments, no detailed opinions, just a brief, unsigned stay with enormous consequences. Critics argue the shadow docket allows the court to make major decisions without transparency or accountability. For aid groups, the delay itself was devastating. Humanitarian crises don't wait for legal schedules. The government's temporary victory achieved its immediate goal. Legal scholars warn that this trend erodes public trust in the judiciary. The traditional, transparent process is being bypassed for high-stakes, politically charged cases. The shadow docket's rise raises urgent questions about justice and democracy. The court's power, wielded in darkness, now shapes the fate of millions. The nation is left to wonder, who decides, and on what grounds? While legal battles rage in Washington, far from the marble halls and heated debates, the real impact is felt in the world's most vulnerable corners. The headlines may focus on politicians and courtrooms, but the consequences ripple outward, touching lives that have no voice in these decisions. For aid organizations, the freeze is nothing short of an operational disaster. Projects that took years to build are suddenly halted, food shipments are canceled at the last minute, and dedicated staff are forced to leave their posts. The machinery of hope grinds to a halt, leaving communities in limbo. Vulnerable communities face brutal, life-altering consequences. Food aid stops abruptly, leaving families hungry. Clinics run out of essential medicine, turning away patients who have nowhere else to go. Refugee camps, already stretched thin, lose critical support, pushing thousands closer to the edge. In famine zones, children who had begun to recover slip back into malnutrition. The progress made over months is erased in days, and hope fades from the eyes of the young. During disease outbreaks, the lack of supplies and staff means preventable deaths rise. Hospitals become overwhelmed, and doctors are forced to make impossible choices about who receives care. America's reputation as a humanitarian leader suffers a serious blow. Allies question its commitment, and trust built over decades begins to erode. The sudden halt sends a chilling message to the world. The U.S. can no longer be counted on as a reliable partner in times of crisis. NGOs are forced to scale back their operations, eroding trust with local populations. Communities that once relied on aid now face uncertainty, making future humanitarian efforts even more challenging. The damage is not just immediate. it weakens the entire system's capacity to save lives tomorrow. Infrastructure is lost, relationships are strained, and the ability to respond to future emergencies is diminished. The freeze's human cost is measured in lives lost, families grieving, and futures dimmed. Each statistic hides a personal tragedy, a story cut short. America's global standing is shaken as protests erupt and international confidence wanes. The world watches, questioning what comes next. The consequences will echo long after the legal fight ends. The scars left behind will take years to heal, if they ever do. For those on the ground, the crisis is not a distant headline, it is their daily reality. The world is watching, and the stakes could not be higher. This case is a constitutional showdown over the separation of powers. Aid groups and their allies defend Congress's exclusive power of the purse, citing the Constitution and the Impoundment Control Act. They argue the president must spend funds as directed by law, not block them for policy reasons. The administration counters that the president needs flexibility in foreign affairs, even if it means overriding congressional appropriations. The stakes, a ruling for the administration, could give presidents a de facto line-item veto, fundamentally shifting the balance of power. A victory for Congress would reaffirm legislative control over spending. The outcome will set a precedent for generations. The future of American democracy hangs in the balance. The Supreme Court's stay has bought time, but the crisis is unresolved. The justices could let the aid flow or take up the case, setting the stage for a landmark decision. The political stakes are enormous. This case is now a flashpoint in national debate. The court's use of the shadow docket has already fueled accusations of partisanship. A ruling for the administration could expand presidential power and erode trust in the judiciary. A ruling for Congress would reaffirm checks and balances. The outcome will shape the future of law, politics, and America's global role. This is about more than money or politics. It's about the nation's character. The Supreme Court's decision will echo for decades. The stakes could not be higher.